So here we are in Italia I, and this is the beginning of the first turn. We're seeing a Celtic major invasion. One thing that I noticed with the rules that is different from everything else in the system that I've seen, or every other game that I've seen of the same family, is there's no... So normally there's a stacking limit and a supply limit. Each territory in the game can only supply so many troops. Here that's been simplified into just a stacking limit, which I think is an easier thing to understand, but it may provide for somewhat odder play with the troops kind of marching in waves as we're seeing here. Less reason to hold back areas, that especially those that aren't defensible. Okay, anyway, what we see is a major invasion. The Celts looked at their victory points, and they have to grab on turn 3, they basically have to hold Picenum and Pavia, Ravenna, Pisa, Florentia, and Verona, and then they get a half point for everything else. So they're going to look at a goal of trying to capture as much of this territory as they can. They're also looking at destroying the Illyrians. So this is after the Celtic major invasion. They've swept down into here and knocked the Illyrians off the map. Now there's still Illyrians waiting to come in Illyricum. We'll see. I'm not sure what the effect of all this is. You'll notice that they pillaged 3 cities. Now they get victory points, even though it's not a victory point turn. Let's see if we can see this. For killing each Illyrian unit, and they've killed 3 of those. And they also get 3 victory points for each successfully pillaged city. So they get 9, a total of 12 points, which I'll mark down on the sheet. Okay, so the Etruscans did nothing. They just collected up points over on the track. They basically just want to survive at this point. The Greeks, however, who go next, we're following. Sorry about that jump. The turn order chart, which is on the order of which is on one of the player aid cards. It's kind of disturbing because I usually record who's going by using a die or some kind of marker to indicate where in the order of play, if it's on the map, we are. Unfortunately, this player aid card has useful information on the other side about battle. There's one side of the other player aid card which has the starting setup. Would have been better if they had reversed which one the starting setup was on, because this is a chart that I need access to all the time, and I think a lot of players would like some way to keep track of whose turn it is next. It's especially important for me because I walk away from the table. Okay, so the Greeks built 2 new units, an army and a navy. They got an initial additional navy and some troops here, and they had a navy back here, and they just gathered it all and attacked here as well, and ended up wiping out a pile of Carthaginian units, 3 guys. Luckily for them, they get a point for each of those they killed. So they're going to get 3 victory points, in addition to grabbing our Argenium. And their long-term goal here, well, short-term perhaps, on turn 2 or 3 they get points for territories that they hold in Sicily or in Africa, and it's their choice when to score the points. And then on turn 3 they get points for specific cities as well, along with everyone else. So the Samnite turn was next, and they did the first raid I've seen in the game. They marched into Calabria. The advantage on a raid is the disadvantage is you don't kill anything. You're just trying to knock the city over. The Greeks are going to spend to recover that city, by the way. The advantage is you don't get the -2 to your die roll, so you can hit this, and you only need 1 hit. So you can raid the city and get your victory points. And in this case, the Samnites want them. They get 3 points for each city they raid, so they wanted to do that. On the other hand, they also get points for killing Greeks, and it seemed like a good idea to move themselves into a position where they actually owned this city, cut the Greeks in half, and see what they can gain down here. They wanted to get out of Picenum, because the Celts want that, and this just seemed like the best way to do things. So they're gonna total themselves 6, 7, 8 victory points for the turn, which is, again, looks really high to me. Okay, and that should finish off the first turn more or less. I don't know if there's any bookkeeping at the end of the turn. No, there doesn't appear to be. Okay, so after the Carthaginians, who launched a major naval battle against the Greeks, and they won that, and they reinforced themselves, we move on, and the Illyrians stayed in their home. They're allowed to treat that as a normal space, even though no one else can go into it, and they can produce there, which is kind of cool. It gives them a safe space. Most countries don't have, most games don't have something like that for any of the countries. And then the Romans. And the Romans are handled completely differently from any other game that I've seen. I mean, the basic flow, style of the game works, but let's show you what happens, what they get. So turn 1, they get Sulpicius with 6 legions in Rome. They get a city at the end of the turn. Turn 2, same kind of thing. Basically, they're supposed to be representing this one tiny little city or set of cities, but they're so dynamic and so powerful in this era that huge amounts of forces are just being poured in every turn with a leader. And on top of that, if they conquer territories, and this we've seen in other games, they can get a city. In this case, they went and conquered Perusia, and they also took Umbria and Napolis. And they built a city in Umbria, helping build a wall against those nasty Celts. I don't think they get victory points for Samnites. One interesting thing they get is they lose victory points for retreating with a leader involved, and they also lose victory points if Rome is pillaged. That's a slightly different mechanism in the game than I've seen before. Not a huge, variance, but whatever. All right, so I think that's the end of the first turn. Well, when I got to at the beginning, a little further into turn 2, I realized when I got to the Etruscan turn that I cheated, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the Celts moved and actually restored a couple of those cities that they had by spending a unit on them. That improves their defensive position and gives them economic value. Basically, they get a point in production for each territory they own, and a point for each city they own. The cities give a -2 to the die roll for combat, so rather than leave 3 guys stacked here, they can get better economics by dropping a guy. And yes, they'd like to spread out and grab some of this extra territory, but the more they spread out, the weaker they are and the easier they are to kill, and a lot of people want to kill them. What I came to with the Etruscans is they had to submit, and so we got these manacles to indicate that they're submitted to the Romans now. Essentially, because they were down to 2 areas and the Romans attacked, they had to give up. So the Romans were allowed to withdraw. I'm not sure if I was allowed to withdraw in this way. However, I could have moved with my leader there and just moved 1 unit in, so it's a legitimate positioning. And now, among other things, when the Etruscans produce income, they share it with the Romans. They give the Romans half the money, rounded down. And what else is in this one? 2 sides can't fight each other. Subjectedation only gets half the victory points, but it counts as victory points for the owner. Um, and there's possibilities of revolts, which can come in the case of the Etruscans. I think it's if Carthage gets close. Let's see what we got here. It's not really readable. They're allowed to revolt starting on game turn 3, and also on game turn 6 if Hannibal's in the same or an adjacent area, and then on game turn 9. And that just breaks the subjugation, which is kind of cool. Alright. So, silly me. I should have videoed a moment before. On the Greek turn, I don't know, did I miss the Samnites? Yeah, okay. So on the Greek turn, they swept into and took over all of Sicily. But then on the Samnite turn, well, the Samnites came in and took Calabria's city and spread out as follows. They considered converting, but there they think there's a defensive penalty to making a city, even if there's an economic advantage to doing so. But Carthage then moved their navy in and drove the Greek fleet off, which had moved down here. And Hamilcar has landed at Syracuse and taken that. So here we're near the end of turn 2. The Illyrians did nothing. Again, just building up. But the Romans had an interesting turn. They had, and this is one of the weird parts of this game, they had something called a campaign. It's not quite a major invasion, i.e. it's not 2 separate moves. What it is that one leader is allowed, and in this case it was Fabius, is allowed to, well, you're allowed to pay a gold for each time you want to move him again and do something else. I'll go into that in a moment. The Romans swept down into Napoli, Samnium, and all the way down here to Calabria. Well, there are only 4 Samnites, and they looked at the numbers they were facing and said, uh-oh, and submitted. That's their option. That gives 2 victory points to the Romans. Okay. What's interesting in this game is you don't score points for territories held by submitted nations. That's very different from all the other games. You get gold for them, but you don't get victory points. You do get victory points for maintaining control of an area, however. Okay. So let's go on with what happened. So the Romans had to retreat. They pulled back to Apulio and also to the other locations, including Rome, as they had to because of the submitted nation. Then they swept into, well, they also moved into Ravenna and captured Pavia. And this should have been converted. They meant to do that during their turn. And then they activated their leader, who was here now, to move one. How did I move? 1, 2, 3, up to Etruria. And now, because the Celts are in there, they're allowed to do a reaction move to that. Now this is getting far more complex than most of these games. They pulled a bunch of their troops into here, were defeated in battle, and now they're down to 3 areas. They will have to submit if they're attacked again by Rome. Rome doesn't terribly want these countries to submit. It's actually a disadvantage for them, and part of the trickery and part of the trickiness in this game will be, I think, trying to avoid getting submission at bad times. That's always an issue, but it's more and more of one here because you just don't get much out of a submission. It's not something you want. Calculate up victory points total, but yeah. So we're going to finish off turn 2, and I did a quick adding of the total victory points. So the Etruscans have gained 1 over the game, and Carthage 3, totaling 4. We see the Celts and Samnites picked up a lot at the beginning. We've got a total of 23 points for them right now. And the Romans and Greeks, well, The Greeks got a lot this turn because of their turn 2 points, and they're totaling up at 18.